Bien, pues hasta aquí el bloque sobre experiencias formativas. A continuación tenemos una conferencia especial sobre un tema clave en la conservación de la construcción y la arquitectura tradicional, que tiene que ver con lo sintético, ¿no? con el predominio de lo sintético, que por desgracia se promueve con frecuencia en las enseñanzas de diseño de la mayor parte de escuelas de arquitectura, y que es una de las grandes amenazas que sufre también la arquitectura tradicional en consecuencia. Os dejo con León Krier, que ha sido uno de los grandes defensores de la arquitectura tradicional durante décadas, que va a hablar sobre lo falso.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's very encouraging to see these conferences here, which is a unique place in the world to see such a concentration on traditional building and crafts. What we see is really two worlds in the making. Un mundo hecho de manos, o de tus manos, or a world built by machines and thought by machines. Because crafts are an emergency of human talents. This is Aristotle wrote very extensively in his book Politics about this. It's not just a matter of the economy, it's something which emerges from genetically, from gifts we have as we are born. And as the gentleman said before, you discover suddenly manipulating materials, who is gifted at what? And generally one is good at one or two things, not at everything. So in a world which is dominated by machine, not only by machines, but by machine thinking, and machines which are entirely and 100% dependent on fossil fuels, that is, on energies which are being depleted, and for which there is no replacement. We have to see it as a temporary phenomenon, and what we are doing is to try to recover or make the skills which build the world by hand, to make those survive, particularly in thinking. But the world of fossil fuels is the world of synthetics, and architecture has changed so radically because the materials which now dominate in construction and development are synthetic materials which are not possible without the heavy use of petrol and fossil fuels. So it's a world of synthetic materials, and it's a synthetic world. Whereas the world built by craft, by hands, is an artificial world. There is a fundamental difference. Hannah Arendt writes greatly about this, that the artificial world made by man is what is proper to human, because the natural world is not familiar to us. It's alien, whereas the artificial world built by hand is natural to us. So synthetic and artificial are two completely different categories. What you see here is a European town built in China. In China, there's a lot of more European towns being built than Chinese towns. It's very disturbing. No. But the artifice, as I said, is proper of imitation, copying, and mimetic behavior is fundamental to all human activities. We don't create, we imitate. And through imitation, we become ourselves. We use our body and our mental gifts to express ourselves, but through the means of imitation and mimetics. And people who pretend that they are creating something are liars. They just don't know. No, we always imitate something. And so you have always, in traditional architecture and building, you have the model which serves, and you have the imitation. You have here this very amusing in Santa Margherita in Italy, where a facade imitates in plaster, in stucco, the shutters which are also there. Or you have, this is a wall in China, where you have clearly a masonry wall, but it imitates not rubble wall, but stone. So artifice is proper to traditional architecture. And then you have, of course, a synthetic here by Maestro Sizza, the enormous hospital in ruin, never finished, which ruined probably the regional budget, displaying the materials which are going to be stuck onto this concrete structure, which is synthetic and I think kitsch. No, we are coming to that. What is authentic and what is really fake? This is a column I built in an Italian palazzo, but it's all plaster. It's steel inside and it's plaster outside. So we have, if we build, we have to often use techniques which are not properly traditional, but one is to maintain crafts, the other one is to maintain language, because construction, building cities and architecture is particularly maintaining patterns which are to the human scale and to social, which allow human and communal behavior rather than dividing societies, isolating people in private suburbs and so on, or in tall skyscrapers. Now, imitation there is always, and you see that the latest fashions, what is cool in architecture has been for about 25 years, but is now warming up and becoming banal, is the imitation not of architectural or artificial models, but of nature. You know, you see that, and Bilbao is a famous example, or this kind of the Guggenheim, that nature is never stable. These are mountains. Mountains are being eroded every day, every second. Erosion is the normal behavior of the outside world. Architecture, traditional architecture, is a way to maintain human-made artifice, maintain it structurally and also socially against erosion. This never works completely, but it has been working for centuries and will work for another, for as long as there will be humans. And now you have these strange architects who imitate, they imitate nature, they make funny forms, whether it's birds or mountains or sandbanks, and then put windows in it. But it is like doing something completely synthetic, something which doesn't exist in nature. It's artificial, but trying to be natural. It's arresting erosion completely in an idiotic way, with materials which nobody can afford for very long. So we are in a stage where traditional architecture is in the minority exercise, and we see it in this school, we see it in the world, we see it in attribution of public buildings. It's now very rare to have public building done in that way. This is the normal way which institutions, whether it's Europe or national or continental or international institutions, you can produce any nonsense, it's considered acceptable and quite good. But if you present this sort of thing, you are considered, why is he doing that? Somebody asked my sister in the street who has nothing to do with architecture, why can't your brothers be modern? I go on repeating this because it shows that now the common people are infected by this idiotic ideology. What is modern? Look in the dictionary, then you find out what it is. We're all modern, whether we like it or not. No. So it is the fossil fuel industry, first coal and then petrol, oil, which really created the concrete industry. And it is those synthetic materials which are enormously energy-vorous, which changed the world of building and lost the control to architects. It's now entirely dictated by engineers. I will come to that. No. Corbusier didn't really invent anything new when he stated his domino system, the 5 points of architecture, condemning traditional building and applauding modernist building. I reverted the polemic by changing the colors. This is bad and this is good. But we are not stupid. I mean, we are not fanatic, because the reality is this, and we have to live with both. But the important thing is to bring back into this world of madness, which drove people literally mad, whether it's Corbusier or Mies van der Rohe or Albert Speer, drove them mad with a superhuman scale, with a hyperscale which is a machine scale, which is against human scale. And human scale not as something sentimental, but something which is fit for our bodies and our minds. No. And that has produced a world of kitsch, of false appearance, of separating in architecture structure, support structure from appearance and from external protection. And so we get accused of doing pastiche, but modernism is equally pastiche. No, it's not authentic in a traditional sense. When you look, most modernist extravaganzas usually have inside this kind of structure. No, they're structurally very banal, but then display interesting shapes. But for how long, before getting banal, becoming banal? I had this experience in London, driving past a building site. I thought, oh God, in beautiful Regent's Park, in the back of Park Crescent, a beautiful area, beautiful neoclassical villas. Now it's going to be messed up by a terrible building. It looked like this. No, sorry. It looked like this for the first 6 months, and suddenly it turned into a classical building. Wow. So actually the technique of building and the appearance, the technology of building, support structure is the same for everyone, whether we like it or not. Very few people are able to do today, only exceptionally, as you saw some examples yesterday, to do authentic traditional building. As a result of this, that style is really equally problematic for modernist appearance or for traditional appearance. We did, and because of this dissociation of structure, of support structure and appearance, there are many mistakes which happen, which could not happen with natural materials. And it's only the modern casting, bolting, or gluing techniques which allow you to build such a structure, such as this. So as a result of all the mistakes we had on our building sites, whether it was in the United States, in Japan, or in England, or in France, we published a book in America called Get Your House Right. It's now translated in many languages, even in China. Is to identify all the mistakes which today craftsmen do because they don't know the language. And even if you give them correct drawings, they will make the mistake because they think it's more we don't know. Like scratching the joints, a la Frank Lloyd Wright. You have virtually to force craftsmen to fill in joints, to butter the joints. I sometimes do it physically. And then they go at night and scratch them out again. Now, after 100 years of losing the facade of the Roby house, Frank Lloyd Wright, they finally filled in the joints. Because you can't maintain, they are fashions, they are not to do with an aesthetic of building. And traditional aesthetic is based on making beautiful shapes for the practical world, for the real world, not just for fashion magazines now. So it is really this kind of the sixth order of architecture, I call it, which changed the world of building. Now, within that world, of course, Corbusier promoted modernism, ship style, it's kind of aesthetic coming from ships, not from architecture, because there was no language for it. And within that modern mindset, which is now universal, this building got always criticized by modernists as being pastiche, and that is supposed to be really avant-garde aesthetic. It's the same technology, it's the same technique. It's concrete with marble glued on it. Actually, the Palazzo della Civiltà is one of the most beautiful buildings in the universe, is concrete core, concrete construction, with a 15 centimeter travertine. So it could almost stand on its own, travertine. But it is that which changed the world. Strangely, to do an arch is considered by the modernist mindset to be reactionary. Yet, let's examine that. There were, under the Third Reich, about 9,000 bridges were built over motorways. Of these 9,000 bridges, all the flatbed concrete bridges, like this one, disappeared in the 70s and 80s, had to be replaced. Because concrete flatbed, bridges suffer enormous damage when they are built in concrete, of erosion and penetration and cracking. The only Nazi bridges built in concrete which still survive are those. No. Designed by Paul Bonatz, because they have traditional arches. Those which sort of could be restored were the ones which had a modernist design but still had a kind of arch from. So even the arch is the natural form of opening. The Greek architrave was an artifice which was almost against nature, because when you have two pillars with a trabeation, it tends to, the weight of gravity is taking down the center, whereas the arch gets actually more solid with gravity. When you make a hole, when you punch a hole into a concrete wall, what will you find? Even if you hammer it with a very big square hammer, huge solid metal hammer, you make a hole, bang, you will have a round hole. No. So the arch is something very interesting, beyond fashion. Now, when you build with synthetic materials, the mistakes done, whether it's a modernist style or a traditional style, always become evident. It's a revenge of the authentic. Things fall off or break away, and so on. Because synthetic materials are highly thermodynamic, they move a lot, whereas traditional materials, whether it's earth or clay or stone or brick, whether it's cooked or not, are relatively stable. And the dividing through the human scale activity of brick, which is designed on the hand, or the larger stone, which is 2 or 3 people carrying it, or a donkey carrying it, is always to an animal scale. And by fitting these together, the thermal movements are micro movements, and when they move, they don't destroy the buildings, whereas the movement within synthetic materials destroys the structures. Now, there is no modernist building of concrete bigger than 30 meters. Now, then you have an expansion joint, and that is the limit to modern building. Even if they are kilometer long, they're always divided in 30-meter sections. So the only mystery is what happens when you build a skyscraper out of concrete. It moves up and down, up and down, up and down. And that destroys the joint, like it does here on the Castellana of Mr. Sáenz de Oiza. All the joints have been blown and need to be repaired. So it is really an architecture which is based on very short experience. But even some of the monumental buildings which were built for instance, at the Or in Rome, by very great architects, which are fantastic buildings, but they have these damages, even though they were still built by great architects. Now you have this incredible mental disease which has invaded even the world of archaeology. The thinking that the old stone is authentic and new stone is synthetic and therefore is not original. It's stupid, it's really not thinking. And they are devastating the Parthenon and archaeological sites, even the most precious building, with this stupid philosophy. It's really not thought through. And it costs billions of money to do this kind of large-scale dentistry. This Nike temple looks like it has gone to the dentist. It's just awful. Instead of rebuilding the damn thing, they took it down, took it to a laboratory for 10 years, and rebuilt it as a ruin. They restore ruins instead of restoring buildings. So even archaeology is infested. And this was the most heroic building of the Agora. The Stoa, Atalos and the Agora, is criticized by archaeologists as a thing not to do. It's the best building done in Athens in the last century. It's very weird. But you have also an artifice which is very interesting, which is in Liguria a lot, which is painting. That was a very artificial, poor wall, which one day I went there by night and there was this incredible, it had completely changed because they had repainted that wall. It's all artifice. So you have the sun shining at midnight. And there are all these techniques which we are discovering. Now we come, I looked a lot at Syria, towns in Syria which are being demolished. When you see this enormous damage which is being done there by dynamite and by bombs. And you compare that to the damage done to traditional structures of Berlin in the post-war period. In Berlin for 5 or 6 years, they called them Ziegelfrauen, women who clean bricks. And with these bricks, one rebuilt Berlin in the 1940s, late 40s and 50s. These kind of synthetic structures cannot be rebuilt, cannot be repaired. And they cannot be repaired by human hand. You must have a very large park of machinery, of very powerful machinery, to do anything with this. No. To grind it to powder or take them down. So the only thing which can be done by poor society is to abandon them, build new towns. So I think Economakis' solution is not just for the people who have fled, but probably a very great solution also for Syria itself. And you have, particularly, this building in Damascus and this one in the West Bank built by the settling Israelis. Exactly the same technology, same technique, same mistakes, same kind of a world which has absolutely no future. And you see it's coming off. The fake is coming off, the revenge of the authentic. And compare that to, this is a 1,000-year ruin that is 2 months old. So it's a world of artifice which has absolutely no future, and that is why I think we are really the avant-garde of how one will build in the future a world by hand and again to a human scale. All this architecture which you see there, the campus of Yale, which was mostly built in the 1920s and 30s, is, according to modernism, is fake architecture because it has steel support structure and then a brick outside wall, but not as skin, also load-bearing wall. And it is great architecture. No. And we are condemned to do this kind of thing. Now, Alejandro will recognize this in your hometown. The damage to these non-traditional structures, and then particularly the mental disease. How do you call such a building? This is in one of the most beautiful towns, Torregano, in 50 meters from there. There's one of the most beautiful squares in the world, but it must not be imitated because it's historic. We don't care about history. We care about the techniques which were used in the past because they are relevant for our future. It's really like people gone mad. Huh? Oh, look at this. And all this superficial will come off very quickly. It's all rubbish. And yet you have then in certain, particularly in France and in the mountains in Germany, in Mallorca, you have often a rather large crowd of architects who have not been trained because schools don't train you to do. It is very rare to have a unit which trains you in doing authentic traditional work. But nevertheless, despite that, you have a lot of traditional, neo-fake traditional building, for instance, in Mallorca or in Andalusia. And some of it is actually quite good, only you can never talk to those architects because they do it because they are told to do it. And therefore they don't do it very well, full of mistakes and absolutely shocking. No. But yet, sometimes produce good results. That was built 10 years ago by somebody I don't know. So you have the same problems of authenticity, whether you have modernist building or traditional building, because it's the same technique of assembling. Even with the great master, Le Corbusier, this looks like was like the avant-garde, the cutting edge of avant-garde. Yet the technique of building was mostly stone walls and concrete frame, and after filled with rubble, and became one of the iconic. Now, it's very little talked about because it's not very sympathetic, because all Corbusier's change of language after the war in 1945 was fundamentally influenced by Nazi military architecture, by this kind of Atlantic Wall construction. And this can be demonstrated, and is absolutely true. The Corbusier's building outside the Unité in Marseille to process rubbish. Now, machine scale, of course, not only produces very poor building, and poor construction and poor aspect, but also particularly terrible mistakes in scale and in meaning. For instance, the contrast, the traditional contrast between public structure and private realm. Normally, the public structures would dominate because they concern the whole community, the whole society, and the whole cohesion of civil society. And private stuff is relatively small. This is in West Palm Beach, where you have this colossal, fake traditional skyscraping monsters, and this is the church. So, world in reverse. And this is China is going mad, completely crazy. And this is the other scale. No, you have a temple for a dog, but in Mallorca. But within classicism, within traditional architecture, you have often the artifice as a theatrical gesture, often. No, in Baroque architecture, for instance, this extraordinary civic center in San Francisco, you have this inner dome and then an outer dome and light filters in between, making this mysterious, fantastic lantern on top. And yet that dome is just plaster. No, it's fake. Yet it is authentic because the forms it represents are really meaningful and represent traditional construction even when they are not. And that is what is relevant about it. We are often condemned to do. What went wrong there is, again, a scale problem, like before, I showed before. That cupola is now lost in this monster skyscraping sprawl. But you have, for instance, this is Christian architecture in Antigua, Guatemala, imitating the famous Maya vaults, you know, which were banked walls, and then, but imitating it in, interestingly, in brick. So you have imitation and, according to a model, sometimes with mistakes, which are sometimes accidents like this, accidents of history. You know, that was a proper arch, but the door became bigger. Or here, an intellectual mistake. I don't know whether it's a fault of the architect. You have properly built, but the stone beds continue and nearly, I mean, this is almost impossible to build. Huh? But historically, in traditional architecture, you find very, very few mistakes like that, whereas with modern building, that's quite normal. Huh? I mean, in my building sites, I come sometimes and they confuse the, you know, the capital is sitting on the bottom and the bottom sits on top, and I mean. But the problem of fake is one which is as old as the industrial period. It is something to do with the imperial expansion of Europe, with enormous power through slave labor dominating the world, and we don't have the brains to control so much energy. That is what led to what Marx called alienation. You know, alienation not just from work, but also from your own capacities. And this, for instance, you think this is a monastery, this is a house. It's not a monastery. And this was done by a great architect, James Wyatt, in the 1830s for a great client, Thomas Beckford. This is done by an enormous architect, Perseus, who was the assistant of Schinkel, but it's a fake building. It's not a mosque, it's a technical building in Potsdam to pump water for the fountains. And so it's after a century nearly of excess, which ended up by, you know, an apartment building in Geneva displaying the whole history and the whole grammar of classical architecture just to house a few well-to-do people, that you have then a reaction of disgust. We can't go on. This is dishonest. We must stop this. And another great architect, Ivar Benson, won this competition in Copenhagen, and you think it's, what is this? You know, you can only, if you know, these apartment buildings with shops and offices, and this is the new Copenhagen Opera building. Just one curtain wall, 1918, great architect. So it's not a matter of talent, it's a matter of thinking, of being overwhelmed by phenomena which you don't control, which ended up by having no architecture at all, no art at all. All museums of modern art are full of fraud. They are not art, they are representing the deprofessionalization and the domination of anti-art. So the reaction against 19th century eclecticism was then excessive, whether we have Mies van der Rohe or Corbusier, and ending up by designing, what is that? No. It used to have a little cross there, it's now replaced by light. It's a church. So you wonder, what should a warehouse look like if churches look like that? Or what should factories look like if cultural palaces look like this? No. There's confusion of language and means. And this is systematic, and we are really in very strict opposition. Because traditional architecture is not only a technology of building with natural materials, according to gravity, and not just like Corbusier said, architecture is the le jeu savant des corps sur la lumière. It's not just volumes, it's something which is built by hand and has to be built according to gravity, whereas modernist buildings, you can put them upside down, they still hold. They are hyperstatic structures, whereas traditional structures are isostatic. No, and there are true innovations within traditional architecture. You know, there have been cooling towers or air terminals of factories which didn't exist historically. And so you innovate typologically when there's a need. You do not innovate because the architect feels like innovating typologically. So they say, the young architects say, this is my typology. Nobody has typology. Typology is a universal category. And nobody invents building types if they are not absolutely necessary. They come from need, and then architecture gives a form to them. And the diversity which is caused by geography, that you build differently in the mountains from the plains or from desert or from cold or warm climates, is only possible because you can have synthetic materials which are isostatic, anti-climate, and use an enormous amount of energy in order to create this scandal. And this is now the world system, but it cannot last. So here's an interesting example of a house. What does this tell you? This tells you, I am an arch, I am a door, I'm a keystone, I'm a shutter, I'm a window, I'm another flat arch, jack arch, and so on, all done in natural materials by human hand. This is something which looks like it, but it is not. This is a 1-inch brick glued onto a wood structure, rotting away. These are shutters. When you close them, they will interfere with you cannot close these. They are nailed to the wall. When you close them, you can't close them. Look at the entrance. The car has the royal access. You jump, you fall into the mud when you get out. Everything about this is synthetic and fake. Everything here is authentic and artificial. So we have to make that difference. And those are our true enemies. That the industry is now used to produce fake. And because the market requires traditional design, the industry produces traditional design, but they are fake. And it is our job to do them correctly, even if we have to use synthetic materials. Because that has absolutely no future. You know, reinventing the house is not needed. Reinventing the window is not needed. Reinventing the door is just an idiocy. Reinventing the roof is just plain stupid. It's a stupid architecture which works with incredible waste of energies, which must be stopped. And in this book, Get Your House Right, we designed the authentic, and then the authentic traditional, and then the fake traditional. I was in one of the projects designed by DPZ, who are the best architects in America, and despite their control, they're enormous, they have fantastic town architect. I saw several houses where they had ordered the wrong pediment. They have an opening and they get the wrong. So we are virtually in a time of architectural illiteracy, and we have to build with illiterate authorities, with illiterate clients, with an illiterate market. And people can't make a difference between a fake arch and a true arch, a veneer deep beauty, and this is really, traditional architecture is wall deep, and so on. Fake roofs, fake mansards. I mean, I didn't know the one in Torregano, and here it is. I drew this 20 years ago. I saw the one. It's everywhere the same. Or instead of having a chimney, to take the exhaust out of half, they have these millions of little pipes going through the roof. Or these artificial ceilings. This was dedicated to James Hillman, an American psychologist, who analyzed the American ceiling. And this is our own project, my best project in England for Prince of Wales, where this was, despite the very good drawing, this was built. And now, after 15 years of rotting away, we are finally correcting it. I took the Prince of Wales, every time I went there, he said, I can't see this anymore. I said, I pay myself for it. It costs £1,500 to repair it. It's unbearable. But we use also cranes, and this is a building done by Quinlan Terry, and you have this enormous lantern heaved by a colossal crane onto this building, which has now, Quinlan Terry always famed himself of building solid masonry construction. Now he goes on building solid masonry construction, but the engineers impose independent prostheses. You call them prostheses, which is correct. But prosthesis is for invalid persons, not for valid persons. We build valid buildings, but engineering imposes so what can you do? I designed this plinth for Queen Mother Monument, which will be opened next 2 weeks by the Queen. And this is stone plinth, made of every piece of stone weighs between 200 and 1,000 kilos. And the engineer imposed a concrete core, a concrete pillar inside. I said, but why do you want to do this? Because this costs money. Usually it should be brick. No, he said, you are right, but I won't sign it. I will not permit it. So we have virtually to do with an idiotic system, but we want to build communities, and communities have to be built with good materials and to the right proportions. And even if the technology is not right, the building technology, we must do it. I was so pleased to see this building going up in Poundbury with arches. And then I turn around, and on the building site were lying these. They do them in the factory. They are beautiful, but it's fake. I designed this substation for electricity, and the engineers even imposed for a structure which is big like a bedroom. They impose steel, because that's where they earn their fee. No. Now we do another one. I wanted to have a solid wall construction. They won't permit it. What do you do? No. Shoot yourself. But again, in classical architecture, this change from vernacular to classical is constant, and the dialogue is very powerful. This a building restored by Balmasier in Uzès, where you have this beautiful stone cornice turning into a wood cornice. Or I designed this temple. I was in a Greek island, in a Swedish island, bored to tears. The only interesting thing was huge granite boulders, and then I found 20 years later that actually in Olympia you have a temple carved entirely out of a solid rock, without joints, solid building, what you saw there. That is a building without joints, carved out of solid rock, temple in Olymp. The fake, our master here, Donald Gray, in front of one of his fountains, he holds the hand, but it's a dry fountain. They cut the water. And Donald did this beautiful building with very strong. Is it finished, or was red or yellow? Red. Red. Finished, okay. Well, well done. Going away from this monster machine, vernacular and classical, it's a language which we must get back. And the fantastic play of scale and message. Now, this looks from afar like one stone, but it's mega stone. It's not machine scale, but God scale. No. Okay, thank you.